So good to see you all this morning. We have been on a bit of a break for the last 2 weeks, and so it's lovely to see all of your faces here in front of us, and thank you for those of you joining us from home today. My hope is that the break was life-giving and restorative for all of you. In our family, we got a new puppy for Christmas. And he's adorable and snuggly, and everyone loves him. And I forgot about puppies. We haven't trained a puppy in like 16 years, like before we had children. And so Bud and I kind of forgot about like all the work that goes into like this adorable creature. They make kids cute. They make puppies cute. This is why, because the kids who are extremely helpful during the day aren't the ones getting up with the puppy at 3 a.m. to go out into the freezing cold so that he can relieve himself, and then getting up with him again at 5:30 when he's ready to start the day. So we love him, but we are slightly sleep deprived. But it's worth it for the puppy. And this too shall pass, right? I don't tell this to you just because I'm slightly obsessed with the puppy, but because the text this week, the text today is all about God parenting the people of Israel, and I thought that this was maybe a funny and little silly illustration of what it means to parent, and slightly a little bit of a parallel to the text this morning. So we are going to be reading from Hosea 11, verses 1 through 4, and then 7 through 9. I'm going to be reading from Dr. Gaffney's translation. We're going to continue on that track through at least through Easter. We'll see how it goes. So if you would like to read along in your translations, I would invite you to do so. When Israel was a child, I loved them, and out of Egypt I called my children. They, the Baals, came to them, and they went to the Baals and sacrificed to idols, and they offered incense. Yet it was I who walked, toddling Ephraim, taking them by their arms. Yet they did not know that I healed them. I led them with human ties, with bonds of love. I was to them like those who lift babies to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. My people were bent on backsliding away from me. To the Most High they call, but God does not bring them up altogether. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I give you up like Admah? And how can I make you like Zeboim? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows altogether warm. I will not release my raging fury. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not a mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. Father, thank you for your words. Mother, thank you for your words. I pray now as we dive into this text that you will speak through me or in spite of me, and that the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts will be acceptable in your sight. Amen. As I read and reread this passage over this week, I was so moved by the language, and I hope you were as well. See, the prophets, both back then and even today, generally get kind of a bad rap. We think of them as giving off like judgment and wrath of God vibes, right? And for just reasons, some. But Hosea presents us with an alternative to that God, and it's one that I'm not sure that we talk enough about. See, Hosea paints a picture of a God who is mothering Israel. And Hosea is unique in some really interesting ways. He is arguably the most tender of the prophets that we read. And here, there's a reason for this. If you're familiar with Hosea, the first 3 chapters of this book speak of his marriage to a prostitute, and it follows their tragic relationship that is essentially a cycle of his wife leaving and Hosea bringing her back. She leaves and Hosea brings her back. And because of his personal tragedy, Hosea is able to communicate God's loving kindness and compassionate, I think, more clearly and more fully. and it comes out of his own experiences. And Hosea is also prophesying in a time during the slow and traumatic downfall of the northern kingdom of Israel. They've not yet been sent into the exile, but it is imminent. There's a lot of unrest, and the people are in this kind of uncertainty. They've suffered under problematic leadership and the constant threat of invasion and exile, and there is no peace. That true shalom that they were promised is not happening. They are not experiencing shalom. And so in the midst of these uncertain times, they've turned to other gods to find some shred of stability and certainty. The hope is that the other gods might provide the protection and the provision that they're so longing for. And if not the gods, then maybe a strong neighbor like the Egyptians, the ones who held them in captivity, the ones who God liberated them from, those guys. And as we read passages like this, or generally the history of Israel, we might be quick to judge the people for their unfaithfulness. Come on, guys, don't you remember the thing that God did for you and continues to do for you? Like, tighten up. That's my own reaction. Maybe you don't relate. But I think that judgment might be a bit too harsh. Because I think if we really meditate on the place that the people of Israel find themselves, their reactions kind of make sense. They're wounded. They're hurting. They're confused. There's so much uncertainty. And they're not experiencing the promised shalom of God. They don't sense God's presence in their midst. Therefore, God must be really mad and is punishing them. Or worse, God must have left them altogether. And when I think about the situation of Israel, it's not difficult to see echoes of our own world today. Am I right? We have had our share of uncertainties, problematic leadership in our country. If you've been watching the news, it's quite the circus. There's been civil unrest, continuing poverty, a pandemic that has left us in collective trauma that we're still trying to figure out how to process. We are not experiencing shalom. And even in our little community, to bring it even closer in, we're living in some uncertainty. We left some problematic structures and the security that comes with that. And we're left wandering in the desert and have been for a year, though sometimes it's felt like 40. And while this decision to leave was the best one for us, we are left floating adrift, to mix metaphors, leaving us wondering what direction we should be heading in. Much like the people of Israel, we might find ourselves grasping for some certainty, something to hold on to, something to ground us, a direction to move in, an answer. And so we see that it's easy to understand the narrative that the people of Israel believed. We're not experiencing the promised shalom. We're suffering. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of uncertainty. God must be punishing us, or God must have abandoned us. And if we believe that, then it would be really easy to start looking for solutions or quick fixes, idols that might bring a sense of certainty, a new project to focus on, researching the next new church growth model, seeking out firm answers from people who are much smarter than we are, sacrificing love for one another on the altar of convenience. But there's another narrative thread that shows up in Scripture. And it occurs more than I think we realize. It's happening here in this text. And it's a narrative of a God who does not forget their children. A God who is constantly showing loving kindness, compassion, mercy. The problem that Hosea is speaking to is that the people of Israel have forgotten who their parent is. They have forgotten that it is God who brought them out of oppression into liberation. It is God who taught them to walk. It was God who fed them, who raised them up. It was God who brought healing to the people even when they didn't realize it, healing wounds that they didn't even know that they had. And it is God who continues to bring healing to God's people. Hosea's message is one of hope. It is not too late to return to God. It is not too late to live out the law. And this is a law that has, quoting Hosea directly, led them with human ties, with bonds of love. It's not a burden to bear, but an act of love. And Hosea is reminding the people that God is continuing to mother them. God is continuing to heal them even in ways they do not realize. God has not abandoned the people. And God does not want to bring wrath upon the people. We hear the struggle. Instead, God is moved by compassion and mercy for their children. And this is a surprising response to the people of Israel, and it is to us, I think. A God of wrath makes more sense. Humankind understands retributive justice so well, but God does not operate like humankind. God, the Holy One, operates in restorative justice. So this is good news for us. This message of hope is for us today as well. We're in the season of Epiphany. It's an unveiling, if you will, of God in the person of Jesus. It's an unveiling of who God truly is. And in this passage, we're met with a God who restores. We're met with a God who has not abandoned us to wander in the wilderness or to float in the water, directionless. God has been restoring us, mothering us all along. At this point, it's helpful to acknowledge that not all of us have experienced good mothering. And in the same way that imagery of God as a good father can redeem our idea of what fatherhood could or should look like, we can say the same for motherhood of God. God redeems what motherhood could look like for us. And Hosea reminds us, God's motherhood looks like teaching or maybe reteaching us to walk without a denominational crutch. God's motherhood looks like being present to lift us up when we fall as we're toddling along. The motherhood of God looks like God bringing us close as we reach out for connection, as we practice the contemplation that we've been learning throughout the year. God's motherhood looks like leading us with human ties and bonds of love as we continue to grow more deeply in community with one another. God has not abandoned us. God is present with us if we can take the time to really look. And I believe that God has been in the process of healing us in ways we have not fully understood. God has been present with us, mothering us through uncertain seasons. And I know that God will continue to be present with us as we begin to move forward. May it be so.